with Cheeky Scientist. Today we're talking about disruptive career strategies for PhDs. We have a lot of great content for you today. We're going to be talking with several special guests. Our special leadership guest is Dr. Patty. Dr. Patty Fletcher is a business influencer, author, innovator. We're going to bring her on, talk about leadership success. We're going to talk about her book, which is all about disruptive career strategies. We're going to talk about several topics with her, including imposter syndrome, gender equality. Lots of great content coming up. We're also going to bring on a very special guest for our Career Corner, where we talk to somebody, a PhD like you, who was in a specific career path. We talk about how they got into that career path, what it's like on a day-to-day basis, what the transition was like, what they do now, where their career's headed, what the career trajectory is like. We will take all of your questions. You can call in at any time, wherever you're watching this. You can also ask your questions in either the chat box if you're a member here with us, or you can ask your questions in a comment, in the comment section wherever you're watching this, whether it's on Facebook, YouTube, or other social media, or our webpage. Good to see all of you here. Thank you for joining. We're going to jump right in and start. I'm going to start sharing my screen, and we're going to go through a few things here before we bring on our special guest. We have, of course, the Show Me the Data section, which is going to start the radio show off. Before I do that, though, I want to share a couple of quick things with you. We produce a lot of content at Cheeky Scientist, and I want to make sure that you are getting full access to all this and you know where everything is. So I'm going to jump on here and show you this screen. That maybe didn't work. That's the wrong screen. Let me try this again. Let's do this. All right, if you can see my screen, can you please type in yes in the chat box for me? That'll just let me know that the share screen function is working. Thank you, Kevin, Sarah, Jessica, Allison. Appreciate that, Tiffany. So I just wanted to bring this up today. We always talk about one thing at the beginning of the radio show that's going on at Cheeky Scientist with one of our programs. So Cheeky Scientist has a portfolio of career and technical programs, and we're spotlighting the Medical Science Liaison Alliance. This is one of our most popular career programs. We only open up enrollment into our programs at set times a year. This is the last day of enrollment for the Medical Science Liaison Alliance program. We've already had about 100 PhDs join this program. Today is the last day, so it's your last chance to get into the program. You can go to the URL msla.cheekyscientist.com to learn more about the program. This program, it's really two things at its core. It's a training dashboard that you get lifetime access to. We keep adding to this training dashboard as changes happen in the MSL industry worldwide, in the medical affairs industry worldwide. We update this with content, things that will help you not only get into your first MSL role or your next MSL role, but will help you thrive as an MSL. Everything from helping you create a KOL territory map, things that will help you get your first job, like attending grand rounds, getting access to MSLs and MSL hiring managers. And that takes us into the second part of the program, which is this private network that, again, you get access to for life. Private network of top MSLs working at Pfizer and Celgene and Johnson & Johnson, every big pharmaceutical company in the world. You get access to them as well as MSL hiring managers so that you know what you need to do to get hired. So again, go to msla.cheekyscientist.com to learn more about this program. This is our spotlight, the program that we're spotlighting for this radio show. If you have questions on it, you can again ask us in the chat box or the comment box. If you're listening to us on the podcast after the radio show, you can always email support@cheekyscientist.com to find out more. We have a blog on the Cheeky Scientist website at cheekyscientist.com/blog that has a lot of information. No matter where you're struggling in your job search or your career overall, you're trying to get into your first industry job, your next industry job, you're just trying to figure out what is out there, what's available for you. You can go to this page, cheekyscientist.com/blog. You can read about resumes and CVs, industry positions, business acumen, networking, interviewing, academic issues, success stories. These are stories from PhDs like you who have transitioned into industry and talk about how they got into their careers, what they like about their careers, so you can start to understand the different options available to you. And then we have special interest as well. Deep dive articles, limited science, many different topics are covered here. Our top most trending article right now is use this 5-part job search strategy to get multiple industry job interviews and job offers as a PhD. can also read our newest article, Find the Right Industry Position for You with this 3-step PhD job search strategy. So we're really trying to help you map out a career strategy at this point because hiring is way up, especially for PhDs. We've talked about this number a lot over the past 18, 20 months. PhD hiring is up over 500%. It's a lot of hiring. If you haven't been hired yet, it's not because you're not valuable, it's just because you need to change your strategy slightly. Okay, so we're going to jump into our show, the first section of our show now. This section is called Show Me the Data. We do it at the beginning of every radio show because let's face it, we're PhDs, we want to see the data. We like talking to people, we want to hear their points of view, but we want to know it's backed by data. So we're going to show you a variety of data today, and to do this, we're going to bring on Jeanette McConnell, who's going to walk us through the Show Me the Data section. We're going to have a conversation about what's trending in the Dataverse today. Let me make sure I can get Jeanette on here. I think if I make you co-host, the video should work.
There we go. Hi.
Right. Hello, how are you today?
Awesome. Great to be here.
Great bow tie as usual. Thanks for joining. All right, so we're talking today about disruptive career success strategies, and a big part of this is to be disruptive, to get into a career, you have to overcome things like imposter syndrome. You have to see yourself as being able to get into the top careers that are out there, not just settling for what you're doing now in academia, but in industry. Right, Jeanette, do you have anything to say before we get started? Why are you excited about this Show Me the Data section?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited because, like you said, there's a lot in there. We're going to go over a couple of different topics. And I think it's really important for us to realize that no matter like what you're thinking, like sometimes if you go back to this data, you can get over those barriers that you're facing mentally, right? To look at the actual numbers, I think as PhDs, that's really important, right? Look at the data and just get over whatever mental blockage you're having. And I think we as PhDs can do that sometimes. Other people struggle, but we really can take that data and its face value and believe it, more than others can.
Yeah, no, I was just reading a book about how we have these two sides to us. This is not groundbreaking, right? But our emotional side and our logical side. But when it comes to certainty, we really use these two things very, very differently. And I think as PhDs, we rely on logical certainty a bit more, not as much as you might think, because we still get emotional, like we still think, well, I'm not qualified for this. If it's something that is outside of our domain, especially, we will feel this sense of imposter syndrome. But at the same time, we're also better able to overcome emotional blockages with logic, right? So as a PhD, you have to know that a lot of the data that we review is on purpose to help you, overcome any challenges you're having in your job search, to show you that, hey, look, it doesn't have to be that big of a deal. Like you might still feel a sense of uncertainty or fear or whatever, but you're actually very, very valuable. You have all the tools you need. You're not looking at things in the right way. And so that's what we're going to go through today. And Jeanette thought we would start with some data about the MSL career track for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's one of the most competitive career tracks to get into, and most PhDs don't think they're qualified for it. They think, and this is where the imposter syndrome comes in, they think that, I need clinical experience. Right, clearly my PhD is not enough. I need clinical experience, I need to be highly trained in this drug pathway or on this drug, I need to be an MD or a PharmD because that's who traditionally has been hired into MSL roles. Not true though. What do you say, Jeanette?
Yeah, no, it's not true at all. We see PhDs get hired out of grad school into MSL positions, right? It's all about how you present yourself, right?
And the different...
You're qualified with your background, no matter what it is.
Yeah, and what we're going to look at here is showing you that it doesn't come down to your technical skills or your clinical background, et cetera. That's not what's required. You can learn all of that. As a PhD, we talk about it a lot, you're a doctor of learning, you can learn that. The first thing you have to wrap your head around is these companies actually want you. We were talking to Yuri Klatchkin, who's MSL at Celgene recently. He told us that last week, Lilly Pharmaceuticals hired 5 PhDs with no experience, no industry experience, no clinical experience, no experience at all in the drug pathway, anything, because they knew they could get them on, get them trained, and that's how high the need is for PhDs in MSL positions. In fact, I just learned this, there's more PhDs as MSLs now than there are PharmDs or MDs. PhDs are the new MSL. So if you're a PhD, you haven't considered this career track because you thought, it's too competitive. It's one of the highest paying careers out there for PhDs. It's actually the fastest growing scientific career right now. You are qualified. And to show you this, we wanted to look at this. This is a survey of medical science liaisons in the pharmaceutical industry. It's from the URL is journals.sagepub.com / a bunch of things. We'll put the link, the specific link in the show flow notes. So if you're listening to us in the podcast later, just come to the blog article that'll be out with the radio show highlights in a week or two. So Jeanette, walk us through this. We see a set of bar graphs, or an overall bar graph with lots of bars, and then on the x-axis are percentages, 0% up to 100, and then on the y-axis is a list of activities. So what are we looking at here?
Yeah, so they surveyed these MSLs and asked them, what do you do? Like, what does your role include? And this is the list they gave them to choose from. So how many, and then the percentage is how many of those people that were surveyed said, yes, this is something that I do in my role. Right? And we talk about this all the time, but the biggest thing that MSLs do is they build relationships with key opinion leaders. And that is on the top of this list. 100% of these MSLs said that that's what they do, right? And I think it's just so important to highlight that. One, that's not a technical skill.
Right.
And two, it is your ability as a PhD to speak to these key opinion leaders at their level because you have such a strong background that makes you really well suited for this role, right? And then the other things on there, I just thought they sound really fun, right? So it reminds you why this position is highly sought after. Things like scientific advice activities, right? That sounds really cool. Delivering scientific presentations, working with different organizations like promotions and marketing presentations, like all different stuff that you get to do in this type of role. I just thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and so, again, look at the list here, like Jeanette said, relationship management, education activities, right? Advice activities. All three of those have to do with basically just teaching and learning and talking to people. In this case, the KOLs, the key opinion leaders, are other, MDs, other leaders in the field. Sometimes they're referred to as thought leaders. Speaker training, advisory boards, resident training. It's a great career. A lot of these don't have to do with having some sort of technical skill. It doesn't have to do with, your ability to, set up a chromatography experiment or do a Western blot or anything like that. It's, can you learn stuff and then talk about it intelligently? And we see medical science liaison roles expanding not just in the pharmaceutical industry, but even into the biotech, biopharmaceutical industry. There's clinical liaisons. They're called many different things. An application scientist role is actually very similar to a medical science liaison. It's just for more strict biotech where there's not as many regulations because patients aren't involved. Again, it's a very popular career track. You might be thinking, oh, one day maybe I'll get into this. No, you can get into this today. You're highly in demand. You don't need industry experience. You don't need a visa, right? You need one, but a company will sponsor you. You don't need clinical trials experience, and you don't need training in that drug or that pathway. You can get this on your own. You can get the training that you need, get access to a network, and you can get into the role. You don't have to go to school for another 4 or 5 years. So we want to stay on this topic of imposter syndrome, but we're going to dive right into the actual, some data on the syndrome itself. This particular figure that we're looking at is a national study. It says 62% of adults experiencing imposter syndrome, or 62% of adults experience imposter syndrome at work. If you look at the data about imposter syndrome, it's pretty overwhelming that most people experience it at some point in their life, especially in their career. I think a lot of you have probably experienced this. Actually, tell me in the chat box, how many of you have experienced something like imposter syndrome where you didn't think you were qualified? It made you less confident and hesitant. Who's experienced that? Type in me or yes in the chat box. Verena says me. Jeanette says me. Roz and Hami, Sarah, Tiffany, thank you. I experienced it in grad school because I didn't work in a lab like a lot of undergrads will work in a lab for a year or two before going to grad school. I didn't. So I just kept waiting for somebody to tap me on the shoulder after I got into grad school and say, "Psst, you don't belong here." Right? That's the kind of, I waited for somebody to come back to my lab bench and see a note on it saying you have no idea what you're doing. And we experienced that at I think our most intense moments before we get up to speak about whatever. Right? This is why public speaking is so fearful, because you don't feel qualified to do it. So that just kind of gives you an idea of the feeling of what imposter syndrome is. But if we look at which career tracks experience the most imposter syndrome in this figure, the results can be pretty surprising. So the subtitle here is percentage of workers who have experienced imposter syndrome in the past 12 months versus the industry that they're in. The industry that they're in is listed on the y-axis. The x-axis is, again, 0% up to 100, but really the highest value here in terms of the bar graphs by industry is 86.96%. Jeanette, walk us through this. What's at the top? What's at the bottom? Any surprises?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to take away from this is that nearly all of these industries, it's more than half, right? The only industry that is lower than is like leisure and sport. So
Tourism.
people who play sports, they're pretty confident.
Yeah.
But everybody else, all of the other industries, it's more than 50% of people in those industries have experienced some form of feeling unqualified, or like they're a fraud, that they're going to be found out, that they're, they shouldn't be in this role. Right, and so there is the healthcare one in there. It is like 70% people in healthcare are feeling like this.
Yeah.
The other one that I thought would be relevant to our audience, there's environment and agriculture. We have a lot of environmental science. It's kind of a growing big field right now. 78% of people in those fields are feeling this way. And so I think it's just really important to know that if this is happening to you, you're not alone, right? Tons of people are feeling like this. And yet, people still make really incredible things happen in these industries, right? So it's like, despite or maybe because of this, right, whatever the relationship is, it doesn't matter that if you feel this way, that's okay. It's just basically a part of being like human. That's like you know what I mean? Like you can get over it, but to realize you're not alone.
I agree. And, for this, it might be helpful to take out the outliers. Okay, so you have like the creative arts, theater, this kind of stuff. You're performing a lot, so that makes sense. It might be very difficult. The other end of the leisure, sports, tourism. You take both those out, like Jeanette said, it's between 53% and about 78%. So a very large portion. I also want to call your attention to look at number 3, information research and analysis. That's the closest to you as a PhD. You're like third from the top. Okay, it's over 78%. Actually, it's tied for the second highest. So, what's it called? There's something that's the reverse of imposter syndrome, where it's like the less you know, the more confident you are. Something. It's E.
Ignorance is bliss.
That's exactly what it is. But there's a different study where it's a chart where the more that you know, the less confident you are, and the less that you know, the more confident. It's called E and D something. But somebody can look it up. We have a bunch of PhDs on it. But it's the reverse of imposter syndrome. If you're in information, you're in data, looking at it constantly, you're going to realize how little you know. And because of that, if you're not careful, you can make the mistake of losing your sense of value. Okay? It's one thing to know that you don't know everything. It's another thing to think that you can't learn anything. Okay, do you see the difference there? Like, you are capable. If you don't know something, you can find it out. A lot of you spent, this is a big thing, a big portion of what you learn in graduate school, right? The ability to say, I don't know, but I can find it out by doing this, or this is how I would do the experiment. Thank you, Jasmine and Mary. Dunning-Kruger. I knew. Did I say E and D? Okay, that's close. Dunning-Kruger effect. Look that up. It's pretty amazing. Anyway, so just know that if you're feeling this way, it's not, your goal shouldn't be to never experience imposter syndrome or to be a little bit afraid or insecure or intimidated. Instead, you should just say, oh, this is normal. That's just normal imposter syndrome. I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah, I want to share a little tidbit about this. So there's a really great story from Neil Gaiman, if anybody knows who that is. He's a famous author. But he was at an event, and he was speaking to someone else who was named Neil, right, at this big event where all these famous people were.
Yeah.
And they were talking about how they both sort of felt like they didn't belong. Like, these people are all so successful. Like, I can't believe I'm here with them, right? The other person he was talking to was Neil Armstrong. Right? So even Neil Armstrong is feeling this, I'm not qualified to be with these successful people. So I just want to put, that's one of my favorite little tidbits about this topic, is that it's so prevalent, and I think that really helps with understanding and working through it.
Yeah, great point. And if you see it, like most things in life, even stress overall, I was watching this video about how this amazing study came out showing that if you have high levels of stress, you're more likely to, have these negative things happen to you, unless you see stress as a positive, and then you're less likely to have these things happen to you. So it's kind of like imposter syndrome. You have imposter syndrome if you realize that, okay, that's normal, and it can actually sharpen you and make sure that you don't get lazy, then it's going to be to your advantage. Because if you don't have that sense of imposter syndrome, it might just be easy to to wing it. You have a big event coming up, a big interview, a big talk. I'll be fine, no problem, right? Because you can get overconfident. So if you see imposter syndrome as just a checks and balances for you, and you take action when you feel it, it can work to your advantage. I'm not speaking from experience. Next figure. We have a lot of great guests lined up, so I want to make sure we have time to get through this, though, so we might go a little bit faster through these last figures. This one is a global leadership forecast, research insights to fuel your people strategy. It's at ey.com/publication. We'll put the link in the post show notes. Jeanette, what are we looking at here? Because I see on the y-axis different traits: motivation to lead before asked, served in a leadership position, etc. And then I see percentages in the bar graphs. Can you walk us through this?
Yeah, so they asked people who in leadership positions if what experiences and motivations that they had, and they found the ones that they had in common. And so what I like about this graphic, we can look at it from the lens of you don't need to be something really specific to be a leader. You don't need to have this specific technical skill or this specific background, right? The number one thing that all those people had in common is that they had the motivation to be a leader. Right? So they wanted to lead, they wanted to take on like a bigger position or a bigger role, and that is the biggest common denominator between these leaders. And I think that's really important to note. It's not that they were the most skilled, it's that they wanted it.
Yeah, and like you said, we tend to think that being a leader is something magical. Like you have to be the best at XYZ technical skill. Like you have to have the most publications, right? I'm speaking in terms for PhDs here. Whatever credibility indicator. It's not though. Look, the first one is just initiative. Do you wait for permission, or do you just like take action to lead by example? Do you have any sort of mentor? Like, if you helped your friends get through stuff, are you a parent? Or are you a formal? All this kind of stuff. I mean, I think Jeanette's hit the nail on the head by saying this just shows you how simple it is to gain leadership experience. It's not something magical. It's not like another 4-year degree. It's things you've likely already done, and you just have to apply that to your professional career too. Patty, she was included in the coveted 18 Women to Watch in 2018 by Brown Brothers Harriman. And Harriman. Dr. Patty is an internationally sought-after speaker, seasoned tech executive, award-winning marketing and business influencer, board member, angel investor, maybe both. Dr. Patty has appeared on the NASDAQ, Cheddar, Bloomberg, and Greater Boston, among other media. She writes for Entrepreneur.com, Inc., The Guardian, Forbes, and The Digitalist, and has contributed or been featured in Time Magazine, Real Simple, Al Jazeera, Forbes, Fortune, Newsweek, Boston Globe, not over yet, The Muse, Huffington Post, and many more. She is the author of the best-selling book, again, Disruptive, Success Strategies for Women Who Break the Mold. Again, you can go to Dr. Patty Fletcher, or where a lot of us hang out, on LinkedIn. We'll put the LinkedIn link there for you. Definitely connect with her, show her how engaged PhDs are. Make sure you tell her thank you for being here with us. Dr. Patty Fletcher, I'm going to make sure she can start her video here. Should be able to turn it on now, Dr. Patty. There we go.
There we go.
And I'll hide everybody else. How are you today?
Great, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for being here with us. I really appreciate your time.
Thrilled to be here. And, seeing my face so big from my bedside watching, going, thank God for air brushing. Yeah.
Your website's great. I really, really like it. It's
Thank you.
very, very professional, and your background's incredible. And we're really looking forward to having a conversation with you about a lot of the topics we kind of set up in the Show Me the Data section. So again, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
So
I hope we get to talk about that last stat.
Yeah.
That talked about around gender diversity, because I don't agree with it. So
Great.
There. Yeah, I'd love to talk about that.
Fantastic. No, this is good. I think anytime we have somebody say they don't agree with the data, we get excited as PhDs because we have good discussions coming up. Well, to set that up, I wanted to talk a little bit about your background, and I really, we always want to know like why you got into what you're doing. Why did you get into success and coaching and working with tech companies, everything that you do? What was your path, and what led to you ultimately writing your book?
Yeah, it's a great question. My first grown-up job was in enterprise software, and got, it's funny hearing you talk about imposter syndrome, because I think I probably still have it. But But so I was hired into this job that I was so underqualified for because nobody like sent me the memo saying women are supposed to get hired for their experience, not their potential. I missed school that day, right? So I took this job instead of taking the class, which is another cliche comment people say about women. And it was around HR software. And it was pre Y2K, so everybody's making money and everything's great. And then there was HR, right? And so going in and really kind of getting this intersection between technology and how we manage people and organize people. And HR was in the basement in the windowless office. Nobody talked to them, right? They were an afterthought. And here they are really managing and being responsible for the most important reason that you succeed or fail as a business. And back then, people weren't thinking that way, but it was pretty obvious. So I loved that intersection. I loved working for an enterprise software company, getting this real understanding that, my goodness, if these systems go down, industry goes down, GDP goes down, right? So really seeing that and seeing the impact on changing how we work and therefore how we live and all that fun stuff. Fast forward a bunch of years, and by then it wasn't just HR software. Started working on big data before big data was a thing, and a lot of that predictive analytics, getting past just looking backwards, from reporting and moving forward, and seeing how we can use essentially at the time transactional data or enterprise data to solve some real big people-based problems. So I go back for my PhD because I wanted to learn how to research like a scholar, and some of this is in my book. I have this very big fascination with my maternal grandmother who helped to raise me. My mom was a working mom before working moms were a thing, and so I spent a lot of my early years with my mom's mom, who I knew very little about. I knew she was orphaned in the genocide with the Armenians, but I didn't really know a lot. And so my MBA research did nothing for me. So I was going down a path of just learning how to research like a scholar, studying that more technical stuff that I was focused in on. And about a year and a half into my dissertation proposal, which as a PhD, that is terrifying, right? For me, it was scarier than the actual research itself. And oh my God, I freaking love my oral defense. I thought that was like being on a stage. It's fabulous. So that to me was, pretty crazy to get that far into a topic, take this class around feminist leadership theory, learn about Carol Gilligan, learn about the challenges that we have, seeing all of these ways in business that we have defined what success looks like, who gets to be successful, how do we get there, what do successful decisions look like, and seeing how that through a gender lens. Few things happened. I realized I was the dumbest person ever because I never really looked around the room and went, okay, I'm in tech, where the heck are all the women? Because that was my normal, right? And so that was a challenge. And then looking at the time, and this was in the mid kind of early 2000s, that all of the research out there had the glass ceiling in technology intensive industries at that kind of VP level. And I love boards for many reasons. So I ended up switching my dissertation to study women who held board of director positions in publicly held life sciences and technology businesses. So few of them then. Life sciences is way better, tech not so great. You've kind of gone the other way. But wanting to understand how these women who were a few generations before me, how they were hacksawing their way to where so few people went. And at the same time, because I grew up in enterprise software, and enterprise software really forces you to create a systems view of things, where you ask questions like, so the world this system lives in is extremely diverse. We have really no one race in the majority at this point. Women were 51% of the workforce in most economies. We were coming up to having the 5 generations at work, right? All of those different demographic things, and of course, the pervasiveness of the third industrial revolution at the time. And seeing, gosh, the way that we have run our businesses, the way success looked like, all of those things I learned that were based on all white men, right? Being those research participants, it doesn't quite fit anymore, right? What makes this possible to have this disparity, to have this imbalance of power? And it really set me forth. And at the same time, I'm hearing from CEOs going, oh my God, we don't have the talent we need today. And dear Lord, we don't have the talent we need tomorrow. There's a shortage of talent. And yet here I am looking at all these incredible women, incredible people who were not Caucasian, right? All of these folks who were in the other represented populations, who were highly skilled, highly qualified, not just intelligent and all that, but capable, right? And have those networks and those things you bring to the table for those influence jobs. And just wondering why.
why is someone not really talking about this in a way that doesn't blame and shame men, doesn't point fingers at underrepresented populations and say change to be more like what we believe success is, and instead, let's look at the system. Let's understand where those unconscious biases are, why they matter, where they matter, and what we can actually do about them. And that's really the reason for the book, to get away from the blame and shame, to get away from let's bury our heads in the problem and the name calling instead of let's actually figure out what's going on and how we can entrepreneur our way out of this.
That's great. So I really like to focus on the system. It's something we work a lot with as PhDs, right? Protocols, methodologies, et cetera. So I want to talk a little bit about, the individual side that holds people back. But first, I'd like to talk about the system before we go down to that. So what were the gaps in the system, or where was the system broken?
There are so many, and let's just do the board for fun, right? The
Sure.
board in this. So, and by the way, the glass ceiling is absolutely critical there. We know that, and at the time, I really believed that's where it was the most important. Looking at work by Elizabeth Cranfield, who you're probably familiar with, and her work that she did at, Elizabeth Kellen, and her work she did at Cranfield University, was really place that glass ceiling at that middle manager level, ultimately changed my viewpoint. But in the policy, decision-making, industry-making level, at the board, it's really interesting. When we look at board decisions and when people are earmarked for C-suite and board, we see that it's typically between the ages of 40 and 49. And it makes a lot of sense, right? That's when you've had a lot of experience, a lot of failure, a lot of success. You have grown up with a population of people who are filling out those influencer seats, who are people who be your next customer, your next board member. So it makes a lot of sense. But here's the problem. That doesn't work for women. It works for men, but it doesn't work for women. If we have children, that tends to be when they need us in an ad hoc basis. It's much easier when your kids are small. If you are part of the sandwich generation like I am at that point, you're also taking care of your parents. You work 3 shifts, you go to work, you come home, you take care of the house. And because women have to constantly prove themselves, which is a system issue thing, we're smart enough, we're tending to spend that 3rd shift in our day educating ourselves. And so our cup essentially runneth over. And in talking with these women, and this was something planted back in my PhD dissertation studies, going, wow, so our system fully believes that it's between the ages of 40 and 49. No one ever stepped back and asked, why? People are living longer, they're working longer than ever. Why not do this? Sure, start at 40, but be okay with women who are 50, 51, 50, men who are 50, 51, 52, right? Because it's not just women. But that's an example where we have this just unconscious bias, the status quo of, well, that's when we look, but it doesn't reflect really the world we live in, how long people are in the workforce, and when we can accommodate something like being on a board or being in a C-suite position.
No, I love that example because it shows that by looking at a system in a different way, you can change it. And it may not make sense, but nobody's ever looked at it. So actually I wanted to drill into that just a little bit because of our audience. How can you suggest people look at the systems that might be influencing them if they've never looked at them? Like, how did you know to look at that system? So now once you realize it's the system, what kind of questions do you ask yourself? How do you start probing the system and testing it and looking for ways to improve it?
Yeah, and it's such a good question, and it's a hard question because this is a topic that's very passion-based, right? And everybody has a story on this topic, whether they're totally for it like I am. I have my long story that started before my mother was even born, right? The stuff I my grandmother and being the voice of people who don't necessarily have a platform or a voice. For others, they're adamantly against it because so-and-so didn't get a job because they were passed over for whatever affirmative action thing. So everybody has a passion for this. And so that's the first thing. It's very easy. The world we live in right now is a name-calling world, right? We're doing a lot of this regardless of where you are. And I know that we're all facing that, and it's not political, it's how we are. And that's a tipping point challenge, and I think most of us understand that. But when we continue to focus in on this or this, right, then we don't actually focus on the problem. We get caught up in all the rhetoric. So the system, the content is really the safest place. We are all victims of the world that we live in. So how do we question that? One of the easiest things to do is to look at something that's not very passionate. So remember a few years ago, a big deal, but not passionate from the same kind of feelings perspective. A few years ago, you might remember in Hawaii, someone in the military pressed the wrong button and sent out this big, right, that big alert saying missiles are coming, right? And anyone who's ever been to Hawaii, has been to Pearl Harbor, knows how terrifying that is. You are 6,000 miles away from civilization, 6 hours away from any other landform, and you think missiles are coming at you. Well, it turned out it was a mistake. So what did we do? We stepped back, the military stepped back and said, what made that possible? Right? And what made it possible was nobody went back in and engineered an off button, right? Or some kind of a QA process. It's the same thing. Look at the world around you. We can go through it all. Let's see. According to McKinsey, if women were paid, just the women in the workforce, were paid equally as men are today, it would add $18 trillion to the global economy. This is an economic imperative. Knowing that women reinvest 90% of the revenue that they make in the world around them, oh my God, it's an economic imperative, right? And we can go through those, all the different demographic stats, whether it's gender or anything else. And then we look and we see who's in charge, who holds power, who has the influence, who has the purse. Women, by the way, control 51% of the wealth in this country. 80 to 90%, like I said, of all consumer buy decisions. We have so much power, we're not in power. It's the same question we asked in Hawaii. What makes this possible? So if I'm going to hire for a role, and I see I'm suffering from what my friend Adam Quinton, who's a VC, calls a meritocracy. That's how he describes the Silicon Valley, right? I hire people who look like me, think like me. And if you see that, if you're going for a hire, if you're going for a job, and you see everyone looks the same, although the company says I want diversity, which, let's definitely talk about why I had a challenge with that research topic, and yet it's not diverse, you got to ask why. So I hear a lot of the time, well, Patty, I would love to have more women in the top level of my organization, or women in influencer positions, or people of who are not Caucasian or LGBTQ, but I tried, can't find them. What makes that possible? Chances are you're going to the same rooms, talking to the same people about the same things, using the same words and expecting a different outcome. So always ask yourself that question. You want to have a population that you're working with that reflects the population who you want to have buy, read, whatever it is, the stuff that you're doing, and yet the people around you don't look like that. You have to ask yourself why. What am I doing that's different than I did yesterday? Chances are not very much, right? So you have to go out there, and you hear people talk when it comes to diversity and inclusion, you hear them talk about the word intention, and that's critical. You intentionally have to go out and seek members of underrepresented populations, whatever they might be, gender, LGBTQ, different label, it doesn't matter. You have to go to them, because in their world, their unconscious biases, well, that door's already closed to me because of that meritocracy. They don't see anybody who looks like them, who welcomes them. The words you're using in your job descriptions don't reflect words that they would use for themselves, right? Or words that your search engine would look at. So really stopping and asking yourself, and I'm so happy you asked that question. What we're talking about here is ultimately unconscious bias. There are 150 different unconscious biases that play in our brains at any given time just at work. The only thing research has shown us that combats unconscious bias is decision interruption. I spend a lot of time looking at the use of technology on decision interruption in the workplace, but us forcing ourselves to say, I want a different outcome, I keep getting to the same outcome, what's making this possible?
No, it's fantastic, and I think it really clarifies things from the organizational perspective, from the system perspective, but what about the individual's perspective? So if we flip it to the other side, what kind of personal responsibility does the individual have? An underrepresented individual that's feeling imposter syndrome, for example, to overcome that. Like if there's an opportunity there, if employers come out and look for them, at the end of the day, that person, that PhD has to step up. Like we have a lot of international PhDs. Sometimes they just feel unconsciously that they can't get a visa, or they don't have the same opportunity, even though they can, and there's companies hiring them, and the data shows in some cases, they still feel that imposter syndrome and they don't try. So what can they do to overcome that? What can they do to seize the opportunities when they present themselves?
Yeah, and it's a really good question and an important one. And going back to what you and Jeanette were talking about before I joined, everybody has imposter syndrome, right? And for some who don't, and those who don't, you got to question them a little bit. So imposter syndrome is really important. And me, I'm a disruptor. So a disruptor, and that's who I talk to. And scientists tend to be disruptors, right? And disruptors, for me, in the way that I would define disruption is you see a status quo that's no longer working, it's inefficient, it's ineffective, doesn't provide value in a meaningful way, and you have to create a new status quo, right? So you're disrupting disruptor, that's what you do as a disruptor. You assemble people to do that, and that's great. So as a disruptor, taking the job you've never taken before, doing something unprecedented, you can't help but feel imposter syndrome. And guess what? That's a good thing. As a disruptor, you have to, because ultimately what you're thinking is, oh crap, I haven't done this before. Who am I to think that I can do this? They're gonna find out. Well, guess what? When someone hires you, they already know what they're getting. And if you are a woman and in that position, you should feel good about yourself because you're bucking the system. We are conditioned as humans to believe that if a man doesn't know something, he takes a job. If a woman doesn't know something, she takes the class. So and for me, I've always taken the job, like we said in the beginning. So I suffer from imposter syndrome. That's number one. Number two, focus in on competence instead of confidence. So confidence means that I've done this before. You're doing something unprecedented, whether it's for you or someone else. Instead, so you can't have confidence. Instead, think about competence. You are a scientist. Your job is to break stuff down, right? The scientific method. Ask a bunch of questions. And then you ask more questions, and more questions, and more questions. That's the competence you have. Breaking down something that's extremely complicated, complex, something that you're probably going to bring your unique perspective, build onto the wall of knowledge there. You have what it takes. And I have to tell you, I coach a lot with women who are new CEOs or new board members. They have careers that are 30, 40, years long. They've done incredible things, and yet they suffer from imposter syndrome because they forget that when they were brought onto that board or brought on as CEO, those board members knew what they were getting. They don't feel you need to have the confidence. They just want you to have the competence to figure it out. Everybody needs to understand you have the competence to figure it out. Start from where you are. That will get you to where you need to be. And that's really the topic around equity. Just like you want to, not equality, because equality assumes that if I give you and I the same access, right, the same door, we're gonna have the same desired finish line and have the same journey there. It doesn't work that way. That's not how it is. You have things working for and against you, I have things working for and against me. Equity means I'm gonna meet you where you are, understand your journey's different, and give you tools in order to overcome whatever unique barriers you have and all that fun stuff. Do that for yourself as well. Start from where you are. Take inventory of what you must know and what other people can help you with, right? Bring in their skills and just go for it. And I know folks like to say fake it till you make it. In my experience and in my research, that actually feeds more into imposter syndrome because ultimately what you're doing is you're faking it instead of saying, this is who I am. This is where I'm starting from. Here are the problems that I see, right? The wisdom of not knowing is a good thing, especially as a scientist, right? We're not biased against anything, but trust you have what it takes. You are a scientist. If anybody can figure it out, you can figure it out.
Excellent. And my last question, I want to kind of do a two-part question because I want to tie in that figure you talked about. So we showed this infographic that basically said the more gender equality that you have, the more successful you will be at a company in terms of profits and culture, etc. Why is that true or not true in your mind? And then how do we use any kind of knowledge we get about where things are now to help us make decisions in the future and where things are going in the future?
Yeah, and I think, because I'm a scientist and a word person, right, and you are as well, right, we both talk for a living, we know the importance of words. Just like there's a distinction between equity and equality, I can't stand the word empower, that's not my job, is to empower you, right, it's about enablement. It's the same thing with diversity. Diversity does not equate to better returns, better innovation. All diversity is bean counting. I have this many who look like this many who look like that, this many who look like that. Inclusion is about culture. It's about having those practices that those middle managers, the people responsible for deciding who comes into your organization, how people get developed, who gets promoted up to the next level, right? That's where your drop-off rate is typically in an organization, and therefore they're responsible for the culture. For them to be able to be so inclusive that we get to the next thing, which is belonging. 72% of the world reports is unhappy. 89% of the workforce around the globe reports is disengaged and has for the last 10 years. Why? We live in a one-size-fits-all world. that fits one very, very, very small population of people. Going back to all that system stuff we talked about, right, and what we learn when we study business at the scholarly level. And so instead of thinking about diversity, because quite frankly, it is a reality, it's not an option, right? You don't have a choice. Let's instead look at the culture and go from I am able to not only provide the programs and education, but those reinforcement mechanisms, the new tools for the people who are responsible for hiring, managing, to be able to manage and lead differently, to a point where I look in the mirror and I say, I belong here. That is what the difference is between financial outcomes and innovation outcomes. Because what happens when I feel like I belong? I'm going to do my best work. I'm going to bring my whole self to work. That has nothing to do with diversity. You're going to have diversity, but it doesn't mean people are at the right layers. It doesn't mean they're going to stay, and it certainly doesn't mean they're going to be engaged in giving the best of what they have. It's a nuanced question.
I see. So so what's bringing that profitability or the successful company is tapping into every different type of individual's identity, essentially, so they feel like they belong to something greater.
That's right, and it's a challenge, right? So I tend to work with, absolutely I work with startups, but the majority of my career has been with the Fortune 1000, really big companies. Lots of them are really old companies, and even the newer ones like Google, right, Amazon, they have a lot of challenges, real world culture. It is very hard to shift culture. We all know what Drucker may or may not have said about, culture eating strategy for breakfast, but it's ultimately true. And so it's really, really hard to change those cultural constructs, to go from exclusive to inclusive, to go from inclusive to you belong, to go from you belong to I belong. But it can be done, and it goes back to, I saw someone in the feed going, I like entrepreneur as a verb, but that's exactly what it is. And that's what's important, by the way, on this topic. The folks who are on the other side, right? So you're a white man, right? You fit this kind of profile of what we believe success in a CEO looks like. And there are lots of men who fit that profile who then feel quite victimized, quite frankly, and I understand that. I understand that psyche. It's been pretty difficult, right, for certain folks to feel like the finger isn't being pointed at them. And that's not what we want, right? That's not what we want at all. And so to be able to have it where everybody is able to make these decisions, to be included, to feel like they belong is important. And we have to be able to entrepreneur and understand that what's a problem over in this part of the organization is not going to be a problem somewhere else. And for people like you, for me, anyone in the workforce, to not see that my leaders have done it perfectly, but they are trying. They are looking at the data, they're exposing the data, they're giving transparency, they're seeing that this might work here, but not over there. That's okay. We're not going to figure this out for a long time. Our systems are very, very old, but we have to start somewhere. And it's really exciting stuff.
Thank you so much, Dr. Patty. Please do me a favor and thank Dr. Patty in the chat box. So I showed your website and your book. Is there anywhere specifically you think this audience should go to connect with you?
Definitely check me out on Twitter. Yep, EK Fletcher. I'm really active on social. Go to my Facebook page, Dr. Patty Fletcher, and on Instagram, Dr. Patty Fletcher. I respond, so check me out, ask me any questions, and also, of course, check out my entrepreneur articles. I'm always looking for new topics. I like to bring forth women who are disrupting the world, and our male allies who are doing the same.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Patty. This is Dr. Patty's Twitter page, so you can connect with her there, on LinkedIn as well. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, if you haven't done so yet, please thank Dr. Patty in the chat box or the comment section, wherever you're watching this. Really, really appreciate her time. Great discussion. We're going to move right forward to our next guest, Matthew Jefferson. So Matthew recently transitioned into a medical science liaison role. So we're going to bring Matthew on here in 1 second. I'm just going to introduce him. We're going to move right along here. We still have a lot of ground to cover. So Matthew is an MSL at Vila Bio. He's supporting the launch of a first-in-class therapy for neuromyelitis optica, NMO. He earned his PhD in neuroscience at Iowa State. Hey, I went to Iowa University, but we'll get along, don't worry. He has a background in basic neuroimmunology research and an immediate expertise in neuroinflammation and neurodegeneration. He currently lives in Ames, Iowa with his wife Amanda, and they're now 3 corgis. I gotta know what that is, Matt. Emma, Ellie, and Edgar. So you like the word E. This is Matt's LinkedIn page. If you haven't connected with him yet, Matt is a Cheeky Scientist Associate. He is also a member of the Medical Science Liaison Alliance. is in an MSL role now. We're really happy to have Matt on with us. Let me make sure I can get your video going for you, Matt. That should allow it. Please do me a favor and say hello to Matt in the chat box, because there he is. Good to see you. Thanks for joining.
Hey, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Isaiah.
Yeah, so I want to jump right in with you and talk to you about this career track. Well, first, when did you transition? How long ago was it?
So I finished my degree in December of 18,
Yes.
and I signed and I started on March 25th.
Amazing. So I just want you to all know that. You know, we all think that there's some reason we can't get into the job that we want right now. It's not true, especially in this hiring market. So Matt went right from getting his PhD into an MSL role.
Not messing around.
Not messing around. Yeah, 2 years ago, people, you'd say like that's impossible. But right now, especially with how many MSLs are needed, this is possible for you. So Matt, you graduated. Before you graduated, you started your job search. Let me rewind even further. Why did you start considering the MSL position? How did you find out about it? How did you learn more about it?
So it's sort of, for me, I sort of had a dovetailing. I had an interest in the CSA, and then right around the time that I sort of learned about the CSA, and I was on the mailing list, I was reading the information, and I was like, oh man, like these people kind of seem to represent the same message that like I sort of feel, and I felt like they were dirty little thoughts, in academia. It's like, oh, I shouldn't feel that way, but I do. And when I started to explore career options, the MSL role popped up. And right about the time that I was getting exposed to CSA material, I had reached out and done an informational interview with someone. She was a local MSL, did the faculty stint, and
Right.
she amazing. And really just sort of solidified my interest in the role. And from there on out, I just, I officially joined the CSA, and then I was committed to doing the networking. And then it paid out for me. So
What was challenging about the process of learning about the medical science liaison role and starting, like when you were first starting to make your way through your job search? What were some of the initial challenges you had?
I had time on my side, fortunately. I started the process early enough. What felt maybe apprehensive for me at the time, still being in graduate school, I was like, well, I got a while until this happens. How do I stay motivated to keep making progress so that once I do finally finish, will I actually be able to successfully make this, what felt like a quantum leap?
Yeah, and I think I think a lot of the people watching feel like it's a quantum leap, even if they're in a postdoc, whatever else. So what did you do, looking back, to keep yourself motivated despite that, instead of saying, well, because what I see happen to a lot of PhDs is they think they have an unlimited amount of time or it's too far, so they just wait and they procrastinate and they wait till like their day before they defend and they're going to be unemployed, or they start trying and then hit some roadblocks, right? They face some rejections and they just quit making progress. So what did you do to stay on track?
The informational interviews for me were overwhelmingly motivating. Like too many of us, I had a tumultuous PhD experience, had the clinical depression, all that fun stuff. And connecting with others and hearing, that the grass truly was greener on the other side, it kept me hungry, it kept me motivated. It was like a free dose of Prozac, talking to an MSL who said, yeah, just, make it through the PhD, and once you get here, it's the best job in the world. And I believe that I had the confidence in myself, and I was like, no, I can add to an organization, I can add that value.
Wow. Well, it's quite a turnaround. So, you mentioned, I don't ever like to gloss over when somebody mentions that they went through about a depression, clinical depression in your case, because I think a lot of PhDs experience that. We've seen the data. What brought that on for you? It might have been a combination of things, but I'm just curious, was there a certain point in your graduate school career where it seemed really heavy? Is there something that happened? Can you tell us, if you can tell us a little bit about it, it'll make the people that are going through it now know that there's a way out.
And it's not awkward to me to talk about. I don't ever stray away from it because, why should you? Some people might get the misperception that, oh, you must have had a rosy, supportive PhD experience and you just magically made this transition. But no, it can be a dogfight personally and professionally. Mine started for me about halfway through my PhD. I had an advisor who I think is a good person, and she believes she does good. But in my experience, she was terribly emotionally manipulative. Would consistently move goalposts, just absent-minded. So you start to kind of get lost. I was not in a big lab. I was my lab for a couple of years until I got one other lab mate. We weren't a financially equipped lab, so you don't feel like you're making an impact. You don't feel like you're moving anywhere. You really start to question, why am I actually doing this? And those feelings can hurt.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing, and I think why this is so important, because if you're from a small lab, I mean, one person, two person, like in Matt's case, you have an advisor who's not doing the best job mentoring you. Maybe you feel isolated. Maybe you feel like most of us, that who've gotten our PhD, that goalpost is always moved. You can't plan ahead for your future. You can't plan for career success because there's no milestones. You're not alone. It's very common, but like Matt, you can turn it around. Okay, so no matter what you're facing, you just have to get access to the right people and know that talking to people is motivating. Don't allow yourself to be isolated. In Matt's case, it was setting up informational interviews with our other MSLs in the MSL Alliance program, or talking to other PhDs who had transitioned into industry. That's going to help your career, and it's going to keep you motivated because it shows you that there is actually a goalpost or milestone. You can get to the other side. You just got to fight a little bit to make sure that there's smaller milestones to get you to that big milestone. Matt, I really appreciate you sharing that. I want to talk a little bit about the interview process. So
Yes.
Every career track's different. What did it look like for you? Did you have a phone screen, then a video interview, a site visit? Walk us through what the steps look like.
Yeah.
Did a
So
referral? Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So for the interview process for MSLs, like all the information that we kind of get exposed to, it's very accurate. Typically, there's a phone screen by HR. They're checking basically, does this candidate have the hard skills on paper? And do they sound like a human being that someone would like to talk to? You have a phone screen, then usually you have a video or a phone interview with the hiring manager. Maybe there's one or two people you have to talk to, and then with any luck, then you can get to an on-site. And then once you're to an on-site, you're down to 3 or 4 people for that spot. So you are absolutely in the chase at that point. And that was the case for me. I thought I was going to be able to leave the summer before, but given the PhD difficulties, I wasn't able to get out soon. I had started to connect with recruiters in the summer that I thought I was going to be able to graduate. And they were like, well, when are you done, Matt? It's like, well, I don't actually quite know yet. So I kind of hit the pause button and I was like, you know what? I'm going to get closer to knowing that I'm done. So I kind of hit the pause button for a couple of months. And then I defended in November. Right around the time that I finished my defense, then I started to reconnect with my network, saying, hey guys, I'm actually entering the job market. What's sort of the beat on the street with companies and hiring. And then I started to connect with recruiters and to continue to expand my network with new connections. So, I hit the ground hard for 2.5 months. I was getting phone screens, fairly regularly. I was applying to positions mostly through internal referrals. I think in the end, I had 4 on-sites scheduled. I went to 3 of them. All of them were from referrals. And of the 3 on-sites I did, I got 1 offer, 1 rejection, and then 1, we like you, but we want you for another territory, so we need to interview for those. So
That's great, and that's a big part of it. I mean, so Matt has an advantage because he's in our advanced MSL Alliance program so that he gets access to the MSLs. But he's also in the association, the Cheeky Scientists Association, which is our flagship program that has over 7,000 PhDs. So the advantage is having access to that network, because it means you can kind of start to build these relationships and talk to people even if you're 2 years away from graduating. And then when you're ready for the job, what Matt said, around 2 months is exactly right. I mean, we see 6 to 12 weeks of really hitting the ground hard, like Matt said, which really just means making sure that you are going through that power networking phase where you're following up informational reviews, asking people for leads, asking them to hand in your resume or to use their name on a cover letter, etc. And all these things start happening together, and that's where you're really putting all of your focus into those efforts. Then you'll end up, like Matt did, with 4 different site visits and multiple offers, ideally, that you can leverage against each other. Matt, you're okay with Matt, right? Or is Matthew?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, I forgot to ask. So, last question: what does it look like now? You're on the other side. Is it? How does it feel? Is it better than you imagined? Is it everything you thought it would be? What are you doing on a daily basis? So I guess I'm looking for, like, how does it feel, the mindset, and then what are you actually doing?
From day one, I felt instantly valued. I love my team. We are a really diverse team. We all bring something very unique and different to the table, and we all have our own sort of background and perspective. And I get to be our science nerd, and that works for me because I am a science nerd. Anytime, hey, Matt, lecture us on basic, neuroimmunology. Awesome. When I'm meeting with KOLs, we call them KEEs or keys. Drives me nuts. They're KOL, but that's just different terminology. When I meet with those people, I leverage my background. I say, hey, you're the clinician, you treat these patients. I come from a research world. Here's kind of how I think about the disease and, the patient perspective. What can I learn from you? How can we work with each other?
Fantastic. And I just think you're such a great example for everyone watching. If you've gone through a tough time, you're in that tough time, just keep going through it, applying the right strategies, getting access to your network, those key principles that Matt just told us, and you'll come out on the other side okay. And tap into your current network. If for those of you that are members in the association, make sure that you're leveraging that to your advantage. Matt, thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on your recent transition and your career success.
Thank you very much, Isaiah. Appreciate you guys.
All right, please do me a favor and thank Matt for his time in the chat box or in the comment section if you haven't already. This takes us to the end of the public portion of the radio show. If you want to watch all of our radio shows, get alerts and updates when we have a new radio show, get access to our articles when they come out, you can go to phdsgethired.com, put in your name and email address there. That's the easiest way.